work. Maybe it won't. All right. Podcast number 1. Welcome. Battle of the Ages.
Put your headphones on and let me know if your level is okay. I'll turn it
Yeah,
down or whatever.
I can hear pretty good. Oh, yeah, I can hear you good. Can you hear me good?
Can't hear you at all. Turn your mic on.
Ah,
Hold it up to you.
that would work. How's that?
Still can't.
Can't hear me? I can hear me. Oh, it's definitely,
There it goes.
it's definitely on.
Let me check.
I can hear you singing.
There you go.
Got me?
Yeah, I got you.
Cool. Well, we're here, me and Stacy Hood, doing our first Battle of the Ages podcast, which could be about anything. Life is a battle, and there's a lot of different battles that you might find yourself in. So, I've been through a few. Today we're gonna.
Are we starting? We're just kicking off like that?
Oh yeah, we're just kicking off. Why not?
All right. Let's go do more of an like an official
Well, do an official.
podcast sort of thing.
Let's do an official then.
All right. Hey, Stacy Hood, joined Kelly Alcott. This is something we've been talking about doing for a while, and some of you guys may know or remember I had a Swell podcast, and we did that for a while, and it just got to be too much at the time, and Kelly owns the gym that I go to, so we started talking about it and decided to do it. So this is called Battle of the Ages podcast, and today is just more or less a introductory sort of thing, so we can figure out where we want to go with it, talk about life, and just Battle of the Ages, really. So today what we're going to do though is talk about Kelly's work and his business and how he got started, and maybe we will offer some advice for you guys. And Kelly, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm excited to talk about myself. You know, everybody likes to talk about that. My wife would be upset with me though. She'd be if she was here. She'd say, "Don't talk about yourself. You need to talk about somebody else."
Don't be so self-centered.
Yeah, don't be so self-centered.
Well,
So,
Kelly always talks about Jocko. What's his last name?
Jocko Willing.
Talks about Jocko's podcast all the time, and we just started talking about it. And Kelly knew that I had a old swap for a while, so busted out the equipment and got started. And we're hoping to kind of offer some advice and kind of life and whatever else.
Oh.
I think between the two of us, we can get there. We'll talk about books and movies and anything else that may help people out. One thing I do want to mention is, a lot of people know about Anthony Bourdain committing suicide yesterday. And for me, the guy was a big influence. I liked his books. He struggled a lot through life, and to find out that he committed suicide yesterday was pretty hard, for some people. As someone who was right there, I've been there on the edge, and we talked about this a little bit. And it's tough. Don't forget, there's always someone here to talk to. Never alone. That's what you always hear. And please don't tell someone that's in this state to just get over it or think happy thoughts. That crap doesn't work. So.
Totally.
All right, total solemn ruin the mood sort of thing. But let's go on. Let's talk about Kelly and his situation and where he is and how he got there.
Yeah. So first I didn't ruin the mood. I think that the goal of this podcast, and at least today's talk, is just it's about my entrepreneurial journey, which is not an illustrious or greatly successful journey. There's been a lot of roadblocks along the way, and I'm just hoping to inspire other entrepreneurs out there, other people that are considering going into business, and to help to help them understand that just because
Battery's dead.
oh,
Man, we were doing so well.
oh we're good. We shook off the dust.
Intro again. See, this is why I have backups.
I should restart my video.
Well, you can edit that.
It's live.
Is it?
Yeah, I'm just shooting it live. I'm gonna just let it go.
That's all right.
It's all good. It'll be out there. I just wanted to capture
This one's dead too.
what we're talking about.
You don't have any double A
I
batteries.
do.
Do you, bro?
Yeah. Come prepared, man.
Hi, everybody.
Double A, baby.
Awesome.
It's like life. You have technical difficulties sometimes, and you just gotta adapt and overcome. That's what they would say in the Marine Corps.
The one thing that I didn't like,
It's all good. Take two.
Start over. That's our luck. All right, hey, Stacy Hood with Kelly Alcott for Battle of the Ages podcast. Take two.
Take two.
Yeah,
Numero uno.
batteries ran out on the recorder. That's my fault. That's my technical glitch. But anyway, what we're going to do with this thing is offer some advice and, I don't know, talk, basically.
Have some fun.
So some of you may remember me from Old School Podcast, which ran a couple years ago, and had a lot of fun with that. And Kelly knew I did that, and he owns the gym I go to, so he's been listening to Jocko's podcast. So he's been asking me a lot about, well, we've been talking about it, and finally we were like, hey, let's just go ahead and do it. So this is Battle Agents Podcast. Hello, welcome. What we're going to talk about today is kind of premises of the podcast, and also what Kelly has done with his business, and hopefully offer some advice for entrepreneurs. And he's a serial entrepreneur, I believe.
I would say that.
So we'll do that, and we'll talk about books and magazines and movies and sports and whatever else. So just real quick though, and we did this on the first take, but I want to talk real quick about Anthony Bourdain. He was a big influence on my writing and what I do on the side. So just real quick, if as someone who has been right there on that edge and was saved by a friend of mine that called me, check on me, just be there for somebody, and don't tell them to get over it, and don't tell them to think happy thoughts, and that doesn't help. Just remember, if you ever get there, you never learn. So that's all I'll say about that, and we'll move on and bring Kelly in and let him blab about his business and where he got where he is today. And
Yeah.
which seems to be doing pretty well. And although he's had his struggles like everybody else as a business owner.
Yeah, totally. I mean, initially when we talked about this, we were going to title this "Never Quit."
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I forgot that.
I think that's kind of the story of my life is it's just having the ability so far to never quit. I think in business, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're somebody that's contemplating getting into business, unless you're lucky, most of the time you're gonna encounter obstacles that are gonna make you consider quitting. And a lot of times I feel like it's at those moments when you feel that, when you just gotta kind of push through and wait.
But that's you hear that a lot from other entrepreneurs, people who they see this, they get this vision in their head, and they don't want to quit, and it becomes like a lust almost. So even if it's not a successful thing, they want to see it through.
You've got to be passionate about it. If you're not passionate about it, one of my big sayings is do what you love what you do. And if you find yourself, not loving what you do, you may be pursuing something that may not work out for you, because there's got to be that passion there. But just because you find yourself between a rock and a hard place, doesn't mean it's time to quit. If you have that vision out there of what you think can be, then you have to keep pushing towards that. But if you're waking up in the morning and you're just, completely burnt out on something. Um, it may be you need to tweak whatever it is whatever your goal is. You have to kind of back up, retool, and adapt, and try it a different way. Or maybe there's a lot of routes to success. At least I hope there is, because I'm still kind of on that journey.
I knew a guy that he was a stock trader, stockbroker, I guess, whatever, in New York, like shitload of money. And he said he was so unhappy. And just one day, went to his wife and said, I can't do this anymore. She left him. And he said he had a big epiphany about what he really wanted out of life. The guy's now a guide in Yellowstone, and he couldn't be happy. And he's like, I don't have the money I used to have. I'm not driving the nice Benz. I'm not, my Rolex I sold so I could buy a house in near Yellowstone. He said, so what is that? It's almost like it's an awakening sort of thing where you kind of come to terms with this is what I want out of life. This is what I really want. And I think that I know you've done other things in your life. You're in tech a little bit, that sort of thing. So and I want to say that you're pretty happy as a gym owner.
I like the effect that it has on people's lives. I feel like we're making an impact. Um, Being a gym owner was really never on my radar screen. It just kind of was a circumstance, which I'm going to tell the whole backstory. It might bore some of you, but this is our podcast, so we can talk about whatever we want to, as long as we want to. So we're gonna treat it like that. Um, it can't always be about the money, though. If it were about the money, um, I wouldn't be a gym owner. This is definitely not a big money business. Now, I'm at a place where I have 3 gyms, so the opportunity's there, um, but it's a slow process. I don't think that at least in the CrossFit world, trying to grow a gym big overnight is possible. This is like growing a tribe of people, and
Well, but that's one of the main tenets of CrossFit. And I say this all the time. You know, people people complain, oh, you're a CrossFit cult guy, or whatever. It's like, well, no, I don't talk about it. I don't try to convert anybody. But since I've been involved with it, it's community, and that's if you go back and look at all the OG guys and read some of the books, Free Fire, and that sort of thing. That was the main thing that Glassman wanted to do was the tenet of community. Anybody can come in. So something like this has got to be a passion project. It can't be I'm going to make $100,000 a year for 5 years. This has got to be a slow burn.
absolutely,
Grow your community.
it's more about I'm going to help 100,000 people or 1,000 people or whoever comes through that door. It's not like a regular gym where it's put some equipment in there, advertise the heck out of it, get as many memberships as you can, and then hope everybody doesn't show up. That's not how it works. I literally consider all of my members family, and I want them to be successful a lot of times more than they want to be successful themselves. It's hard work, and anytime that there's hard work involved with anything, people are going to struggle staying on track. And so, I feel like my wiring is, I have a talent of pursuing people and encouraging people.
Wait a minute. Pursuing people.
Pursuing people, yes, like going after them. Like, where are you? Why aren't you here? Are your goals still the same as they were the first time that you showed up in my
So we're
office?
not talking about like having restraining orders or anything like that.
Almost,
That's not what we're talking
almost.
about.
There's
Now, I will say, let me interject in all seriousness. Since I've started back, you have texted me like, hey man, are you going to, the other day, or which I mentioned last night, you were like, hey, think a great experience, come show up. And I will say that, I mean, that is a cool thing to get from your gym owner, from your coach, is to get that, because I've never, the other gyms that I've been to, I've
I like to try to get in the mental side of things really more than
That's just as important as the physical,
exactly.
if not more so.
And that's I take that responsibility as a CrossFit gym owner, as the leader of the communities. You know, I'm here just as much to be an influence on you outside of the gym. You know, more in terms of keeping you on track on the physical side of things, the exercise side of things, and I get as much back from my members in terms of my own like mental motivation and whatnot. I feel, I've been through periods of time now being in this business for 8 years where I just don't feel like working out anymore. It's hard. It gets monotonous. It's all the other areas of my life are wearing me down. I have three teenage daughters. Well, one of them's 20, so I'm graduated from the teen years with one of them. But again, it's leaning on that community of people. So it's really that's the most amazing part of the CrossFit business. If you're listening to this podcast and you've never been in a CrossFit gym before, if you are, you probably have been because there's some level of interest there. But you know, if you haven't, go do it. We'd love to have you at one of my gyms, but who knows where you are in the world. But go to CrossFit.com and go to the affiliate finder map and just pick one out that's close to you and go visit a few. And if it feels good, if they're welcoming and they're genuinely concerned with you when you come through that door, ask them if you can have a free month and hang out with them.
Yeah, a lot of places will do that. They'll offer you, commit for a while and check this out. That sort of thing. They invite you in and then they want you to stay, but they try to show you, the best parts of it. Now, with my other podcast, I got to know a lot of gyms around the country, and it's very rare to find a gym that isn't welcoming, that isn't, they don't want you to be part of their community and that sort of thing. And I'll tell you, as someone who was big time anti-gym, the Lughead, Gold's Gym, sort of guys that broke gyms, I was anti that for a long time. I really enjoy CrossFit, and it's fun because you get to become friends with people, and you it's almost like work where you get concerned if someone doesn't show up. Your class time, whatever class time you go to, and somebody's not there, you're like, oh, where's Joe? And then he shows up, and you're like, hey man, you okay? And you get this rapport going.
Yeah,
Versus a bro gym or a lifetime or anybody else that where you don't have that camaraderie, where you're concerned and you get to know someone. And I'm not saying you have to be best friends and hang out with them all the time. I mean, you can be friends with them,
yeah,
and enjoy their company. And you end up usually finding someone who's on your level, your workout level, and you start, it becomes a competition. And it helps you out. It makes you look good and feel better about yourself and sleep better at night. All that
absolutely.
sort of thing.
That's like a family. I mean,
Yeah,
it really is.
yeah,
You rely on one another to stay on track. To stay with it. Like I said just a minute ago, it's a process. Everybody's on a different continuum. I like to use that word. And you try to meet people as an owner wherever they are, and just keep them moving somewhat down that continuum. It's not always a forward progression either. It can be forward, backwards, forward.
right.
It's like one step forward, two steps back, all that kind of
Like
stuff.
me.
Yeah, it happens. That's the beauty of having people around you. You're not out there trying to do life alone.
Right.
So,
Well, let's get back to how you got started. Like I said, I believe you had told me to talk about this before, but you got your start, I think, in tech.
well,
Was that right, or?
I'm just gonna go all the way back. I love telling the story. I find it's an interesting story because it's a lot of effort along the way, and I'm still trying to hit that ball out of the park. I've been a ambitious entrepreneur since a very young age. My dad, going all the way back from when I was a kid, my dad was a serial entrepreneur as well. So from the time I was a baby, my dad was self-employed. So I grew up just kind of watching him and seeing what he was doing, and I was always intrigued by being the boss. I liked the fact that he was the one that was telling people what to do and where to go, and he always seemed like he was, leading the ship. Um, I didn't always agree with the way that he treated people. Um, he's former Marine, Vietnam veteran, so there's a lot of that going on in there.
What did he do? What was his business?
So Dad was in the big equipment business when I was a
Okay.
kid, so I was really intrigued with that. I remember
Bulldozers, construction companies, stuff.
selling that type of
I
thing.
got you.
So when somebody would buy a piece of equipment, occasionally I would ride in the Freightliner with him to go deliver that equipment and things like that. I remember that all the way back from when I was 3, 4 years old. Honestly, I have memories that far back up in Ohio where I was born. Um, so that my dad has had a huge influence on my business career. I've learned a lot of good things, and I've learned a lot of things that I wanted to change along the way. Uh, Started my first business. I'll call it a business when I was in middle school. Um, I saw a need for Jolly Ranchers. Kids
I
kids
was
lo-
going to ask if it was like potato chips. That's funny.
kids love Jolly Ranchers, and I had a drugstore that was within striking distance of my bicycle, and they sold these
That is
big bags of Jolly Ranchers. So I'd go buy the big bag of Jolly Ranchers and slowly distribute those Jolly Ranchers at the middle school. And I can't even remember what I was selling them for. I want to say it was like a nickel a piece. So if you take a bag of 1,000 Jolly Ranchers and sell them for a nickel a piece, you're making a pretty good profit.
that's
And then you go buy some more Jolly Ranchers, and that was my first business. And then also, throughout my life, once we moved from Ohio to Alabama, my dad started a commercial waterproofing business, and so I was the kid out there bringing materials and to the job site and cleaning up after people, and just it wasn't really something that I wanted to do. It was something that my dad forced me to do, which I'm really thankful that he taught me that work ethic. But I was able to see that from the inside out, the out in the field, and then dad, working with the crews and whatnot. So I did that for the majority of my youth and teen years, and then as I got a little bit older,
when, as a child of a very young adult, did you read full of resentment back then, or like God, I hate cleaning up this stuff, or were you seeing the good side of it back then? See what I'm saying? Or,
yeah,
was it the typical teenage angst? Mad at the world. Why am I out here? I want to be with my friends. He's making work. He sucks. Or did you go? I appreciate.
I went back and forth.
Okay.
Some days were better than others. I did like money, and
Yeah.
from a very young age, and this is why I struggled in school. I was not a good student because I knew at a very young age that I wanted to do what my dad did. I wanted that business, and
That particular business, or just a business in general.
I wanted my dad's company. Like
Gotcha.
I literally mentally thought that my life was going to be shaped from just at some point in time coming in and just taking over. And I thought that at a very young age. And so that's kind of where things got a little bit bumpy with my dad because in the waterproofing business, he had great success early on and ended up having multiple locations. He had offices in Charlotte, North Carolina, and Atlanta, Birmingham, and boomed in Atlanta right around the time of the Olympics, 1996-ish. When the Olympics?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was 1996. So that's 5 years after I graduated high school, um, and that I'll kind of get to that part of the story. Um, Back up and kind of bring it all to where we are today. So we did the Jolly Rancher thing. I learned a lot about sales and the Jolly Rancher thing. And then I had another little venture with a buddy of mine who was also an entrepreneurial type personality. We would drive around in his pickup truck and look for driveways that had the big hump when you go in, and if it had a big hump, we'd go knock on the door and tell them we could fix it for $100. And so we'd go buy some bags of concrete and mix them up, and we had the driveway hump repair business. That was my second entrepreneurial journey. And Lee, who was a year older than me, he was the majority owner of the company, which I didn't like. I'm not a I like to be the major. I like to be the one in control. So that business, it had a short lifespan. The margins weren't all that great, and the work was pretty hard. We were pretty good salesmen at the time. I think a lot of people just appreciated the young kids having the balls to come knock on the door and
Yeah.
offer to fix their driveway. So they just let us do it, especially since our price was $100, and that's pretty cheap. And I think our concrete costs were about $30. So, you know, 5 hours of work, 4 hours of work, however long it took us. We really weren't making that much money, but when you're uh, 16 years old or however old we were at the time, it seemed like a good bit. So yeah, so throughout the course of that time working for my dad in different areas of the business, I was hired and fired probably, I don't know, I don't even think I can count them all. Dad and I have just, you know, for whatever reason, he would get fired up with me. I know he wanted me to be the best and be, kind of the example for everybody. But as a teenager, you're not always capable of doing that type of thing. So,
Yeah, you don't see it. Everything's black and white.
yeah,
You don't see the grays and the other colors. I tell my kids this all the time. The world is not black and white. There's a lot of other colors. And even though my father was not, I think he was a lot like yours. I know he meant well what he was trying to do. Maybe he wouldn't have found it the wrong way, but he was trying to teach me that life.
yeah,
And I'm sure, as a father, I'm probably doing the same thing. You're probably doing the same thing. You mean well and misunderstanding the intentions.
oh yeah, you want the best for them.
As they get older, the brain matures and they see other colors other than black and white and start appreciating what you
Yeah,
really want.
well, they get a few bumps and bruises
Right.
on their body, and then they start to realize you're not as dumb as what they thought you are.
Right.
So yeah, so I graduated high school barely. Like I said, I was not into the books, and shortly after that, I'm only hearing out of one ear.
Okay.
Does it matter? Can you hear me loud and clear? That's fine. So a buddy of mine had signed up for the Marines, and I was at UAB, and I wasn't doing much at UAB. Just kind of didn't really want to be there, but I was there because that's what everybody else was doing. They were,
That's University of Alabama. For those who may
yeah. So one day we're just sitting around shooting the bull, and he was like, "Hey, why don't you ride over here and talk to this recruiter with me?" I was like, "Yeah, okay." So we hopped in the car and we rode over to the Marine Corps recruiting station in Vestavia, Alabama, and there was this just Hulk-looking gunnery sergeant sitting there. Gunny Sergeant Hubbard. I'll never forget it. He told me that I could go and I get 3 meals a day and sunshine and exercise and
God's gonna
didn't
guide.
even have to pay for it. And I was like, yeah, Dad did that. He probably wouldn't want me to do it. Probably wouldn't think I could do it. So I'm going to do it. And so I signed up to the delayed entry program, which most people are in the delayed entry program for like 6 months to a year. I was in the delayed entry program for a whole 30 days. So I went from going to the University of Alabama, freshly graduated from high school, to Paris Island, South Carolina, in a matter of 30 days. And Dad was begging me not to do it all the way down to the point of the day I was leaving. He's like, "You don't have to do this."
Until you get sworn in.
Yeah, and I was just in my mind, I was determined to prove that I could do it. You know, um, there was some areas in my life where I really wanted to kind of take the ball and run with it in the the waterproofing business, the building restoration business, and his business, and he was always kind of pushing me back. He didn't want the other people in the business to think he was giving me preferential treatment. He was always really big on that. So he would go out of his way to make sure that it looked like I was having to pay my dues. That was always a big thing with my dad. Even to this day at 46, he's still of that mindset that I'm still paying my dues. It's kind of weird. I'm like, Dad, I've got 3 teenage kids, and kind of been around the block a little bit now. So you know that's another story we'll get into. So I dove into the Marine Corps. I still remember vividly riding the bus. Buddy of mine we went on the buddy program, and there happened to be another guy that I played football with too that was on that bus. And we're smoking and joking on the way there, enjoying our last little bit of freedom, but little did we know what that was going to really look like. And I still remember pulling into Paris Island they always get you there in the middle of the night. I mean, it's customary that you arrive at Paris Island at like 2 a.m. And that drill instructor coming on that bus, and I remember that transition out there onto those footprints and thinking to myself, wow, what have I done? Literally. And the thing is the first week you're there, you think you're in, doing something difficult. The first week is processing, where you're getting your clothes, you're getting your hair cut, you're getting shots, you're just kind of processing in, and you're like, oh my God, you're standing fire watch, you're learning how to communicate with these drill instructors. You can't look at them. You can't. I mean, there's so many things that you can't do anymore that you're used to doing. Freedom is gone, And then you transition to training, and you go from having one drill instructor to 4. So you get all your stuff together. They march you down to the training section of Paris Island, and drop you off. And then the shit hits the fan. It's like you've got the senior drill instructor, which is the guy he's the one that's supposed to be kind of protecting you from the other, they call them heavies. And it's a situation that's different than anything else I've ever experienced. It's like there's 4 drill instructors, but it feels like there's 50. And it's like you can't even blink an eye or cut an eyeball without them seeing it. So, that experience was one of the hardest experiences of my life. I grew up in Vestavia Hills, Alabama, which is a pretty affluent area of Alabama, and so I wasn't like the millennials, I don't think, where I had the sense of entitlement. I knew how to work, but I had never been in an environment where I no longer could choose what I wanted to do, and even if I wanted to. So, yeah, oh yeah. So, 13 weeks at Paris Island. Graduated from boot camp in July. I was there from April to July, so the hot part of the summer, and I got to experience the sand fleas and learn how to stand at attention with a sand flea crawling in your nose and in your ears and across your eyeball without moving. Standing at attention for so long and having to pee your pants because you can't move is all kinds of interesting things that they do to you. But I remember that day graduating from Paris Island that I was happier that day than graduating from high school. It was like I just felt this incredible sense of accomplishment. The hard part for me at boot camp was I had a girlfriend back home, and so I was like, oh, just missing her so bad. That affected my military experience a lot. That's just part of the experience I had. If you're considering going into the military, I recommend just go ahead and cut it off before you go. Just break up. That way you're not having to deal with the Dear John letters. I know that one of my buddies who was a little bit further in training than I was, who was in, he had gone to Paris Island, I think 4 weeks before we had. And I remember getting the message back that he was now hanging out with my girlfriend back at home, and I had to deal with that in boot camp, which was pretty sucky, I have to say. I was like, golly, I'm I'm trapped in this godforsaken Paris Island place, and my so-called buddies at home, smooching on my girlfriend. So, but anyway, I made it. I got out and went home and uh, just kissed the ground. Literally, I was so thankful to be out of there. And then, the remainder of my experience in the Marine Corps, I served as a security forces. After going to multiple schools, I served as a security forces guy in Panama, which was a whole other experience in a third world country. I learned a lot there. I remember stepping off the airplane and not knowing a soul. Um, and at that point, I smoked cigarettes. At that point, I remember I was smoking cigarettes on the airplane, which definitely doesn't happen anymore. But got there. Um, the air was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and it's always like that in Panama. And that was an experience. I learned a lot there. I learned how to be a big boy. It wasn't like boot camp. Things change a lot. They treat you somewhat like a human being.
How many years were you? Two or
So I was just in 2 years. I got out a little early. I was home on leave and had a little knee injury. And quite honestly, I kind of milked it. Um, and it was the time when Bill Clinton was president, and we were making a bunch of military cutbacks. And so I just kind of rode that baby out, and they paid me to get out, and that was the second happiest day of my life. I was, with an entrepreneurial mindset, being in the military is really hard because
it's gotta be like having a trapped tiger, a wild tiger,
it
just crawling to get out.
it totally is.
Yeah.
Because just because someone has rank on their sleeve means they're your boss,
Right.
and regardless of whether they're a good boss or not. And I was bad about wanting to be the boss myself. I mean, that's just how I'm wired. So didn't have a very illustrious military career. I didn't see combat. I didn't do anything really interesting like that. The only thing that was going on while I was in the Marines was Somalia. We were over there, and that was just a small platoon. And or I say platoon, I don't, it's bigger than a platoon. But before I got discharged, they sent me to Norfolk, Virginia. So I spent about 6 weeks there on like a maintenance platoon while I was being processed out. Um, the government doesn't move fast for anything. So I knew I was getting out. They called it a med board. It was an honorable discharge. Um, and I remember the day when I got out, just going to the airport. And it was like, wow, back to the real world. And came home, still kind of was chasing after that girlfriend. It was one of these 5-year deals where, oh, I think I can make it work this time. I think I was 22 years old at the time. Came back, and she was in Auburn sorority, and I decided that it was time for me to go down to Auburn and try to sow my wild oats and maybe pick up and pick up where I left off, and maybe school was going to be my thing. Um,
Where are you going to school for?
oh, I was just going to school to chase after my girlfriend. That's why I was there, honestly. So I went down to Auburn. I was down there for a total of 18 months, and this kind of picks up on my entrepreneurial journey again. I got down there. I had the GI Bill, and my dad was paying for everything. It was like just a college dream. And so
Selling
first,
Jolly
no, this time we decided that we were going to get into blackjack. We're running some blackjack tables. So I got into the gambling business, and that was this was a short-lived thing as well. Yeah, yeah, pretty much. So we decided the way we would make money is we would buy a bunch of beer, and we've got a couple of blackjack tables, and we'd invite all of our friends over, and we'd give them free beer and try to take all their money. And on top of that, we were also sports booking. And so that kind of rumbled along for a little while, and then this one weekend we just took this massive hit, and we owed like we had a backer in Birmingham. He was like the dude that was he was a senior when I was a freshman, and he was the dude that could beat everybody up, and everybody was scared of him. He was our backer, but the fact was is we got hammered in Auburn, and they were booking bets in Birmingham, and they got hammered worse, and so everything just kind of hit the fan. You know, we were like out of money. We couldn't pay everybody, so all of a sudden, instead of us being the mafia going out there and trying to collect our money, everybody was trying to get their money from us. So it was an uncomfortable situation. So what we did is we paid the big ones off, the ones we could, and the rest of them just you know that's the gambling business. You know that's why it's called gambling. Um, I remember me and my buddy, we decided we were going to bet on basketball. And this was during March Madness, and so we had like 18 bets out there, and all day from morning to night, I think we went like 1-17. Like, couldn't believe it. Lost like almost every single bet. So that was not a very successful entrepreneurial venture for me. It looked good and it smelled good at first, but man, it just didn't pan out like other things. So it was time to adapt. I remember it was Christmas time, and I was sitting on the couch in my apartment, and there was one last person still in Auburn. Everybody else had gone home, and I remember looking at him going, "Well, I think this is the end of the line for me." And I packed up my clothes and actually left all my furniture that I had taken down to Auburn. I just left it there and drove home. And I was like, I'm done here. And I think I even owed another month's rent, which they ended up chasing me down for that, and I had to go back to court and pay all the fees and whatnot. I had to learn everything the hard way. So I got back home, and obviously it was time to go to work because I needed money. And so for a short stint,
Did you move back in with your parents then?
I did. I'll move back in with my parents for just a short period of time, and then actually went to work for 2 men in a truck. It was one of the only jobs that I ever had that I wasn't working for myself, and I learned really quick that that was very hard work for very little money, and so I decided it was time to go back into business for myself. This is about the time I met my wife, so I'm getting into my early 20s, out of the Marines, and I was going to use the knowledge that I had gained from watching my dad in the waterproofing business, and I was going to go into the waterproofing business myself for the first time. Um,
Now, was he still running his business?
oh yeah,
So you guys would have competed.
oh yeah, we were competitors now at this point. So that was this is we had several periods of competing with one another, and I'll delve off into that, but.
That made holidays fun.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, my parents were divorced at an early age, so I kind of bounced back and forth. Always had a refuge with my mom, which was probably not the greatest thing for me. But every time Dad and I would get sideways, I could always go and run, and my mom would give me shelter. They were divorced when I was about 4.5, so that went on. So I had strong sales skills. I always had the ability to talk with people and make them like me. And so I went out and started just calling on people that were in the construction business, and I landed a project. I think it was like 13 grand this project, and which is a lot of money, when you're first getting started. And so I went out and
What would have been your profit?
I think I made $6,000 or $7,000 off that job, as and I had no overhead except for an apartment rent payment, which I was splitting with somebody else.
And you were doing the work yourself.
I was doing the work myself with some of my buddies. I had just enough knowledge to try to do it right. Um, Waterproofing can be it can be peculiar if you don't do the job right and it leaks. Um, you can find yourself in trouble, which I don't know if what that job consisted of was digging out some foundations on some condos over in Mountain Brook. Um, and we had the brute strength to do it, and we pulled it off and kind of cruised along doing that. At the same time, I was dating now my wife, and she got pregnant. Um, I was like, oh, this is a turn of events that weren't really in my
You know
plans.
what causes that?
I do now. I do now. So when she ended up pregnant, I was like, I'm just gonna have to swallow my pride and go back and talk to my dad. And this is kind of how things went for me. So I went and sat down with my dad and broke the news to him. Of course, he didn't necessarily take that news very well. He always wanted to he always wanted to be the one that said "I told you so" to me, that kind of thing. But he was always.
It's that generation.
I think
Mine
so.
was the same.
Yeah. So it's like, if you would have just listened to me, you wouldn't be in this mess. So let me save you once again. So at the time, um, this is right around the Olympics time, like we were talking about. We had he had just acquired a new business in North Carolina, and he said, "Well, I think you need to go and be a part of this new branch in North Carolina, and I think you might be able to help us out there." So I drove to Atlanta to meet with the general manager from North Carolina, and we had an office in Atlanta as well, who was managed by another guy that had been working with the company for a long time, so ever since I was a small kid. And in the process of going to interview with the general manager in Atlanta, or excuse me, the general manager in North Carolina, the general manager in Atlanta said, "Well, I think I'd rather have you here," and he made me a better offer. So I took it. This was right about the time. This is like February of 1997 is when this was, because I got married on February 1st, and then I moved to Atlanta on February the 2nd. So I'd already been over there. Stacy was here in Birmingham, kind of leading up to that. I was just over there, kind of getting my feet wet. And
That's not me, by the way. That's his wife,
oh
Stacy.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Sorry. Um, so I find myself once again back on the entrepreneurial journey, working for Dad. This time, my job was to sell. I'd done everything else, operations management and superintendent and job stalker and delivery guy and whatever other title there was before you can actually get out there and sell it. So I was excited. There was a couple other salesmen that were working for the company, and I wanted to prove that I could do it and do it better. And so, in my mind, the only way to get the ball rolling, get the pipeline filled, was to take my truck, drive downtown, get out my notepad, I had a little camera, and I just began to walk around the city of Atlanta, and I was looking for the type of work that the services that we offered: concrete repair, coatings, brick repair, um, anything and everything that was involved with restoring and preserving the exterior of a building, and that's a lot. And so in my first year there, I ended up selling over $1 million worth of work. I mean, I was just like one proposal after the other. And so in that process, um, my job started to cycle into the field. So they were out doing work for my clients who I'd gone out and earned their business. And so I was intimately involved, because I knew that if we did a good job for my client, that they would likely hire us again. And so give us a referral. I understood that. And so there were some things that when there was things going on that I thought were excess or needed to be changed to reduce our costs, I was vocal about that. And I was vocal about areas of the business that I thought could improve. And so I began to create a little friction amongst the middle management of the company. And so I'd go to Dad and I'd have these ideas, and at that point, he just really wasn't hearing it. It was one of those, even at that point, at 25 and, still a young kid, but somewhat experienced. and I felt like I had my dad's best interests at heart. Um, but he still wasn't hearing it. So I got frustrated and I decided, well, I've been here in Atlanta for a year. I've built my client base up. I know my way around. And so I talked it over with Stacy, who was my wife, was quite apprehensive. She's not nearly the entrepreneurial mind that I am, so things kind of, I've kind of drug her through the meat grinder. But so I decided, yeah, it's time. I'm going back into business for myself again, and so I did. And being that I'd been out there selling for a year, it was really quick that I put some work on the books, and then I found myself um, hanging off the sides of buildings on a rope doing repairs at a Holiday Inn. That was my first job. I remember it. And then a couple other jobs came quickly, and then year after year we were like doubling our sales. We had like first year we did like 200,000, second year was like 400, and third year was like 800, and then fifth year we broke $1 million in sales, and so we're cruising along, and I was having the time of my life. A lot of money for a mid 20s kid, and I had a child at the time, but in my mind, you know, I guess it's kind of watching my dad and the way he did things. My job was to be the provider, the financial provider, and that was kind of it. Unfortunately for my wife, so we had to. And that's another story we'll get into, but try to stick to the business story at this point. So cruising along, uh, feeling like I'm king of the world, a lot of confidence, selling my rear end off. I mean, it seemed like everywhere I go, every job we bid on, we had expanded. I had projects in South Georgia, and I was coming over to Alabama and getting work. Had projects in Tennessee, and I had a buddy of mine that came along from Auburn. And remember, this is early 2000s now, and so we're dot-com boom is kind of booming. That's coming along, and it's pre 9/11.
Because I started more time
Yeah, you could the market. I mean, Atlanta was just exploding. I mean, they were going to change the state bird to the tower crane in Atlanta. I mean, it was everywhere you looked. And so, I think our sales at this point were like almost like $250,000 a month. I mean, we were knocking down some work. So I felt pretty indestructible. And a buddy of mine from Auburn, who had raised some venture capital for his technology stuff, approached me and said, "Hey, man, why don't we take some of this money and develop a construction management software program and take it to market and sell it?" And this is the time when like Constructware and Meridian Systems and all these ASP platforms, cloud platform management programs were coming on the market, and everybody had the latest and the greatest. And so I was like, yeah, I mean, I believed in him. He sold me on it. I mean, I loved everything that was coming out of his mouth. He had me hanging. And so he threw a contract out there in front of me. It was to put him on retainer and then to pay a web development team this is like an 18-month long launch period. And a buddy of mine who graduated top of our class, went and played football at Yale, was an attorney over in Atlanta. He said, "Don't dare sign that contract." Of course, I knew better. I knew that it would work, and so I signed it and dove in head first. I was obligated to pay in his retainer. It cost me $6,500 a month, and
what would you do?
well, ultimately, I would be the owner of our software, and we were doing this whole rebrand, front end, really cool looking website, all custom little buttons and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, we thought we were big shots. We were in the conference room with the whiteboard out, and we were doing all this planning and you know sitting around getting stoned and thinking that we were just it was just a period of time in my life where I thought I had the world by the cojones, and I just felt indestructible. I really did, you know. And things were rocking and rolling along. I mean, we rebranded. We started off as Restoration Services, and then we went to this. We called it Restoration MD. I was the restoration doctor. I literally, this is no joke. I would go meet with a client, and as a joke, I'd have a stethoscope and I'd put it on the side of the building and say, "Let the restoration doctor take a look at this." I mean, it was crazy. So we got to humming along on that, man, and we were gonna, we had a launch party when we released our new website. He was trying to do it up big. Rented a hotel room, or not a hotel room, but a conference room, and had food. We invited all of our
Now,
clients.
was there actually business coming in at this time, or was it just a lot of pomp and circumstance?
No, there was business coming in. I mean, we were using the money. This is where it gets kind of difficult. We were using the money from the business to finance this venture of
Okay, so you
developing
still had
software.
money.
Yeah, we weren't making money off software. We were spending money that we were making in the contracting business. So then we had 9/11, kind of in the midst of this. Things changed, and
It killed us also. Because we had just launched, well, we were just kicking up with World Soccer Shop, and we had redone rugby shop and had opened shops down in New Zealand and Australia. And 9/11 happened, and tech just died.
things
I remember
changed.
very distinctly, it was like we went from just slamming the business to we're getting calls from our investors every month, wondering what's going on, what happened, why are why are we getting any money, what's going on, why aren't you ordering product? Couldn't afford it.
Yeah,
Didn't have anything in, we're selling it.
things took a dramatic change at that point. In construction, especially commercial construction, I mean, you're financing the deal. You're going
Now,
out.
because construction business, it died also around that time too.
Oh yeah.
Didn't it take a big nosedive
Oh
as
yeah,
well?
yeah. The market changed dramatically at that point, and that threw us into a big tailspin. Um, you know, One of the arrangements that I had with, I don't know if you've ever heard of invoice factoring or not, but I had a guy. This is just a private investor type guy. Not say investor. So with invoice factoring in contracting, you can go out and do a job, and you might not be getting paid for 30 to 60 days, but you can go and you can sell that invoice and get 75% of the value of the invoice for a percentage. And then when the job gets paid, you take the check to the factor, and they give you the difference. Well, that worked out pretty good for a while, but everything everything was kind of crumbling out there, and he had another guy that he was loaning money to that defaulted, and it was a big sum of money, and so that dried up. And when that happened, nobody was really, no banks or anybody was interested in trying to loan me any money, and so the the biggest majority of my cash flow was going to finance this software deal. I mean, when I said $6,500 a month, that ramped up when we brought in the development team. I wrote this guy two checks for $16,000 a piece and another check for $32,000. And I can still remember writing on that check and signing that check. I can still visually see it. Um, and so, what happened is finally a day came along, and it was, payroll was running at like 15 grand a month, or 15 grand a week. I'm sorry, it was big payroll. So one week came along, and we just simply didn't have the money to pay payroll. And so I went to the guy that I was doing the software development project with, and I said, "Hey man, we're gonna have to put this on hold." And he didn't like that, so he ended up suing me. So that started to happen. Cars got repossessed. I mean, things were just getting really crazy, and so um, ultimately, I went crawling back to Dad once again. In the midst, I was like, "Dad," I said, I drove over to Birmingham, met with my dad. This is probably gonna, I mean, we're probably gonna go on another. This is probably take another 20 minutes or so. So yeah, kind of with my tail between my legs, I was like, "Hey, I got a ton of backlog. I got a bunch of work going that's out there. I got these receivables. I've got this equipment. What do you want to do? Can you help me? And so at that point in time, I really had no idea what was going on within my dad's business. You know, for me, I still had that mentality of how I viewed my dad as a kid. Indestructible. That business will never topple. That, it's always going to be just this machine. And so he's like, sure, son. What we'll do is we'll do an asset purchase agreement. You can come work for us. We'll pay off all the debt of your company. You give us all your equipment, all your backlog, all your receivables, and we'll just sail off into the sunset. At least that's what I was thinking. He was going to just save me. Well, at the time, he was a little detached from his business. My dad has a little history of he likes the ladies, and he had decided he was chasing a girlfriend at the time, and this was when he was married to my stepmother. So anyway, that's a whole other story that we'll get into. But
Now, was he a drinker? We talked the other day a little bit about our dad.
yeah,
That's right. Yeah, we talked about that. He was a little bit of a drinker.
not really. I
Not
mentioned
like mine.
he was more of a closet type guy. He never really he likes to have a little bit of wine these days now, but back then he was just it was either business. He was more of a womanizer. I'll give him that. I mean, now I'm 46, and if I went and wrote them all down, I've known him with about 12 to 15 different women. So he's a little bit of a Hugh Hefner. That's another story. So anyway, so we had that conversation, and I sold the business. When I say sold, I just basically handed over everything that I had, and came in, and then started to.
Now, where were you financially? Were you when you did the asset? Was it like did you have anything you and Stacy could live on, or was it like oh shit, I'm starting to move her?
So
Yeah, nothing.
financially, I was tight and behind, and one of the things my dad did do when they did the asset purchase agreement is he kind of brought me up to even, took care of some back house payments and just some things like that, and just kind of got me to where I was at a little bit of a comfortable point. But it didn't take long for me to realize that Southern Commercial Waterproofing was the name of the company, to realize that they were in a pretty dire situation. Like, they had a lot of work going on, but they were upside down. And about that time, um, the bank decided that they weren't lending any more money. Dad had a big line of credit with the bank, and the financials just weren't looking good. And so the bank they had decided that the business was in trouble. And so we were just going balls out to try to land work and to try to get the thing right side up, but it had churned its way so far upside down. I mean, the overhead at that time was just insane. I mean, he had multiple accountants on staff, a lot of middle management, and so there was a lot of dough going out the door, and there wasn't enough coming in to justify it. So in 2002, South Trust Bank came in, and Southern Commercial Waterproofing went into the special assets division after 25 years in business, where they came in and closing the thing down. Basically, everything got really, really scary at that point in time. So for me, I was kind of the fortunate and unfortunate one to know what was going on throughout the business, like what was going on in the jobs. I knew what the materials were used for. I knew how to use the equipment, all these things. And South Trust they were going to literally like auction off everything. It was just going to be done. That was going to be how they were.
What was going on with
People were getting let go left and right. Um, a lot of that was going on. And so I came forward to South Trust, and I said, let's put our heads together and take a look at some of these jobs and see, take the ones that have money in them, and I'll be the guy that will go out there and get them done, and I'll give you a price to do them, and you guys keep the rest. And they like that idea. And so the other idea I had was, well, on top of that, I would like to try to figure out a way to acquire all the assets of this business, like all the equipment, everything, because I knew what to do with it. Um, and kind of going on in the background still, I was still in Atlanta. This dad's corporate office was in Birmingham. I was still in Atlanta, and so there was still some opportunities to do contracting work. I had to do something to survive, and a 9 to 5 is not going to do it for me. I mean, I couldn't do it. I mean, I had too much. Had a house payment that was house payment when I was in Atlanta was like $2,500 a month. I mean, and then cars and kids and all these things. So I had a guy I knew pretty well over in Atlanta that worked for my dad that had a wife who was a consultant, an Accenture consultant, a partner, a big high-paid salary type lady. He was just kind of his name was Pete. He was just kind of had a truck and knowledge and some money and was from Chicago and had a lot of experience in the restoration business. And so he was just kind of cruising along, doing waterproofing. And so I'll kind of circle back to that. But South Trust, they liked the idea of me buying all the assets of the company rather than selling it. But the problem is I didn't have any cash, and so I finagled this agreement with the bank. I said, all right, so I'm doing these jobs for you, and we placed a value on the equipment that they were good with. And so I went out and I found a partner that had a little money, and we talked. He was also in the contracting business, and he agreed to do this deal with me at a 51% shareholder. So he was in control, and I really didn't have much of a choice but to go at it that way. And honestly, I was pretty humble at that point. And so South Trust agreed to give us access to the equipment and let us pay it off in 3 payments over a period of 90 days. So we began, yeah. So we began to consolidate equipment all over the Southeast to Atlanta. All total, it was 7 tractor trailer loads of equipment and like God knows how much material. And this material is like urethanes and epoxies and corrosive type stuff. Things that the Department of Environmental Management had their eyeball on. So I turned into the moving company, consolidated everything to Atlanta, and began to have the world's largest garage sale. And this kind of leads me into another business venture that kind of crops up. So there's 2 things going on at the same time. One, I just mentioned Pete, who had the Von Ryan Corporation, was the name of the company, his waterproofing company. And so I went to him. I said, hey, look, I got all this equipment, I got this material. How can we make a deal so I can continue to operate? So he was very gracious with me. He opened up a bank account, gave me a checking account, allowed me to use his insurance. And so essentially I was right back in business. Didn't ask me for a penny. Okay, he was doing his thing, and our exchange was he could use my equipment, he could use up my materials, and that's how we operated. And so we kind of cruised along like that, and at the same time, our garage sale was going on, and we were able to sell enough equipment to satisfy the debt with South Trust. So we sold things off. We paid the bank off. That was called what was the name of that venture? It was like it had the name Venture or something. My partner that was in the purchase of the assets of the business, he made out like a banshee, but he did everything right. He's not like me. I'm not really good at crossing the T's and dotting the I's sometimes. But opened it up, started the business, sold it off, closed it up, deal was done. And So I'm kind of in the midst of the process of selling the equipment off. Um, when you're in the contracting business, you kind of have people that work for you that'll just pretty much follow you anywhere. Your field guys. I mean, they're your boys. They're with you to the end as long as they can get a paycheck on Friday. And some of them will stick with you even if they got to wait an extra week. So I had one guy that knew how deep I had gotten into that software development project, and knew I was all into the tech thing. Like that was my passion. I wanted to get back to that. Even though I had spent a ton of money, it's still to this day now the knowledge that I gained through that project. I'm still applying that now. So he said, "Hey man, I know a guy. He's a guru with the computer. He knows how to do all kinds of stuff. Um, he's looking actually to do some contracting work too, and he may be somebody you want to talk to." I said, "Well, tell him to send me a resume. I want to look at it." So he sent me a resume, and he had all this computer language code that he had taught himself and stuff that I didn't even know what the heck it was. But it was interesting enough for me. I was like, "Hey man, why don't you just come on in for an interview and we'll talk." And so hot August afternoon, I think this is like 2003ish, something like that. 6'5", 250-pound man rolls up on his bicycle in front of my office, sweating from head to toe, sits down in front of me, and I was like, "This dude really wants to work." And so he was looking. I showed him what I was doing, and the way that I was getting the word out for my garage sale is I was just getting online, and there's this website called the Blue Book of Building and Construction. It's just essentially a big database, and so I would search the database, copy and paste the fax numbers from the database into a spreadsheet, and then take that spreadsheet and upload it to like JFax, a mass faxing thing, and I was just faxing inventory out. And I was spending hours and hours and hours copying and pasting these fax numbers. And so he looked at that with me, and we talked about him working in the field and also helping with computers and all this kind of stuff. And so that was our deal, is he was going to help work on the field. And he said, "Well, I can write a scripting program that will automate that process of you having to sit there and copy and paste that data over into a spreadsheet." I was like, "A scripting program?" He's like, "Yeah, kind of automate that and make it to where it just does it, and you don't have to do it." And I was like, "That would be awesome. And in fact, I'll give you $500 if you can do that." And he's like, "Wow, deal." So he disappeared for a couple of days and came back. And at that time, we were using Microsoft Outlook for our email program. And it was the very first time that I saw I think he brought it back on a little thumb drive, and I plugged it in the computer and dumped all that information into my Outlook. And I was blown away. I was like, "Wow, that's really cool." I said, "This is something. Yes, this has got wheels. If we can keep doing this." And so we rumbled along there. Von Ryan Corporation. We were growing. We had some money behind us, and we were selling deals, and we were actually even doing bonded jobs, government work, and all kinds of stuff. I mean, it was looking good. And we were actually paying ourselves a salary of like, I remember I was getting a check for like $1,700 a week in a salary. And so we rumble along, and then me and my partner Pete, we flew out to Vegas to a concrete show. And in the process of flying out there, his wife tells him that she'd been having an affair. And so this was my first trip to Vegas. And Pete was pretty long-faced, as you can imagine. And he ended up getting back on a plane the next day and flying out of there. So I was in Vegas for 3 days by myself. And things changed dramatically after that. Got back, and suddenly our financial horsepower was no longer there. And so our bonding capacity and all these things had gone away. I mean, we were still doing okay, but the writing was on the wall for me. I was like, "There's no way that this company can keep paying me this kind of a salary." So I was dabbling along there. This other business, this little data business, was kind of being born. It was called the Data Bridge. That's what we named this business. And so we went on this journey of database building for several years. Like, once I identified that we could scrape that blue book of building and construction, I was like, okay, well, what about the International Facility Management Association and the International Real Estate Management Association and any other kind of professional association out there that I could find that had a searchable database? I was like, we're going to make that ours. And so that's what we did. I mean, we literally had like 7 computers set up where we were doing what we call data mining, not the kind of data mining where you're trying to get statistics and whatnot. We were literally like digging data out of the internet and putting it in our own database, which was pretty freaking cool. And so finally, I just let Pete know. I was like, hey, man, I'm at a place where I think I can step aside and take this financial burden off your company, and I'm gonna run with this data bridge thing. And so that kind of looked like this. I went on and continued to scrape out that blue book of building construction. I kind of figured out a creative way of that. And at the same time, I was building this massive list of building owners and property managers and facility managers and that type of thing, who was the target for all these people in the blue book of building construction. So I knew, based on what I had applied for Von Ryan, so part of what I was doing is mining these databases and putting together these email blasts and producing leads for Von Ryan. It was working. It's like, wow, well, if this will work in Atlanta, it'll work in Los Angeles and San Francisco and Seattle. And so I began to send out email blasts to contractors saying, hey, I've built this database of building owners and property managers, and I'm pretty crafty at creating these outbound campaigns, and I'm willing to give you exclusivity to your particular area. And so what I would try to do is find like a roofer or a landscaper or a painter in each major market, and went at it. Um, Give them the category exclusivity. If they didn't want to, if someone didn't want to do that, we could also sell them a list. So I brokered all kinds of lists. In fact, I had a big restoration company out of Baltimore, Maryland that had branch offices all over the U.S. I sold them a list for $6,500. It was just a matter of exporting and emailing a list, and they paid me that. And that was the biggest sale I had on a list sale. But man, I felt like that was pretty awesome. So we did that. We would develop relationships all over the U.S. just through spam email, essentially targeted spam email. And so that led me into I